Well, thanks for coming, thanks for attending this talk. I was expecting to see lots of people, and my wishes were granted. So a lot of people attending today. Thanks a lot. Obviously, I'm the only one here besides a few people. So thanks a lot for watching this presentation. I think it's hopefully it's going to be interesting. We're just going to go for 30 minutes, so not too long. What I'm going to talk about today is a few models that I think entrepreneurs should be aware of in order to, I would say, properly lead a venture and perhaps, increase their chance of success and hopefully, having a bit of learning, because I think creating a company for everybody is really a learning curve, is being for myself. So I'm going to give you a short introduction to what I've did before. First of all, you can contact me on Twitter. So you'll see on the slides here, there's my Twitter. You can send me direct messages there. And I put a quote. I think this is something I like to live by. It's one that was attributed to Alan Paris, who's the founder of Stanford CS, the computer science department. And it goes as follows: whereas we think we know something, that when we learn it, and we're convinced that we know it when we can teach it. The fact is, we don't really know it until we can code it on an automatic computer. And I like because it really says that you should really be hands-on when you design a product, when you create a company, and which puts you closer to really putting in practice what you might have read or learned somewhere at school. And that goes as well for the models and basically the ideas you make yourself of the I would say the market that your product is aiming for, and basically the customers you're trying to reach. And because this basically is the way to be more efficient when you try basically to create a business. So my experience in entrepreneurship. So my areas of expertise is technology. I define myself as a technologist because I think I'm really fond of the technology in general. I worked 12 years for IBM, mostly in New York, but also spent 5 years in Tokyo. I founded my first company in 2011, which is actually an innovation consulting company, but also Sun Elias, as you can read. And but also I created a few companies myself, because I think as exactly I was mentioning before, practicing innovation really, but not saying you do innovation, but also create innovation yourself, which is at some point equate to really funding a company and trying to really create a product and sell it on the market to see how it feels. So I sold my last company to Snap, which is the company behind Snapchat, the application. And that was a company that was funded, co-founded that company in 2016. That was named Strong Code. A few words. I also love writing and reading, obviously, but I write a lot in online publication like Medium, and also have a French blog in Le Temps. So the crux of this presentation. Put this in 3 points, right? The first one is a good one. So I think establishing a strategy to enter the market can be done diligently and systematically using models. So this is really, it's like know your models is like, think of it like people have done this before you, and they might actually have good teachings, and you might actually likely earn a lot if you're actually aware of what these people did before, and what are the conclusions and things you can reuse for your own business. The bad thing is that there's not only one model, there's actually multiple models, and it could be also a bunch of false prophets. People say do it this way, but it's not very efficient. But apparently, there's a convergence towards like good practices, and I'm going to show you a few of these ones here. And the ugly is that actually it's difficult to roll out a strategy. And is actually, even if you do, there's actually no guarantee of success. But I think it's much better than having no plan, or basically, going day by day, or trying basically to say, let's see what we do today. What's the next step there? I think if you try to plan in advance, obviously not years in advance, but at least 3 to 6 months, it can really help you with designing a product. Just one word about the first company I founded, San Elias. It's basically a few things that we do. So we do business advisory, where we basically talk about exactly the thing I mentioned to you before, these models, and basically how to go about creating a strategy. Obviously, innovation, which I will link one of these models to innovation, and financial advisory and education. So what do I show you this chart is that the first two ones, basically we see a few models. Actually, the first model we'll see is connected to business advisory, and the rest of the model, the third model is also business advisory, and the second model will be innovation. So how does that work? Basically, with this is that I actually create usually my companies within the scope of San Elias, and the way we do this basically is that we use all the ingredients to help companies. In this case, the last one I funded, to be clear, is it was about like 2.5 years effort, and the goal here was to take a technology that was created in one of the technical schools here in Switzerland. Actually, to name it is like HGVD, so the engineering school in Yverdon. And the goal here was basically to bring that product to market. And so what I did, my role here was to really coach the engineers that were behind the product, because I did not code the product in this case, and to create a sales strategy, go to market with this product. And the interesting part here, this is where the innovation part comes into play, is that I put together a disruptive strategy and explain exactly in what sense it is disruptive with the example. And eventually, when we got acquired, so basically we led negotiation and for the acquisition using the financial practice. So, and then I put it, obviously it's a little bit joke here, is vesting purgatory, but I spent 3 years working at Snap, and actually right now I'm actually on the next step when I'm creating a new startup company, with the goal of coming up with a new product. All right, so let's start with model one. So I thought talking about disruption was perhaps an interesting thing, because in my experience, it's a word that is quite misused. People say they disrupt things, and just perhaps not for the same reason as the one of the person who started using that term, who is Clayton Christensen, is a professor at Harvard. He came up with a thing that now is referred to as the disruption theory. So, and there's actually a real background behind it. You can actually, if you look on the slide, the book called The Innovator's Dilemma actually gives the foundations for disruption theory. And if you read the book, you feel it's a bit antiquated, because the examples are from the 90s, and talk about hard drives, how hard companies in the business of hard drives have disrupted each other's with technology, but also some other examples. But I think one important thing to understand is that there's really a reason, and a means to an end, if you want to go to market with a disruptive strategy. And this is something that can be really helpful. The reason also what I want to mention this here is because startups are actually more, I would say, inclined to disrupt companies for the reasons that actually I'll go to now. So let me first give you an example of a disruption of a product, disruption of a product with another one. And the example I like to give is the example of Microsoft Word, which has been a product that has been on the market for about at least 15 to 20 years, as far as I remember. And what I think is interesting is that Microsoft Word has been here, and if you look at the number of features in Microsoft Word, they've been, increasingly. It became increasingly more complex, and these features are being added continuously over these years. Obviously, with changes in the UI and other improvements from the perspective of Microsoft, and so on. And one interesting aspect is that Although Microsoft Word became kind of the default application, for everybody's, wanting to author documents, there's a much simpler product that came on the market with slightly different features, and basically that, in this case, really, in the definition of Christensen, disrupted Microsoft Word. And this product is Google Doc. And obviously, Google is a big company, so I said before, you might actually think of disruption if you start a company, so I might contradict myself, but this is not the case here. We're just comparing two products to each other. And the reason why Google Doc is a disruptive product regarding to Microsoft is that it's actually initially catered to a lower market, low-end market. You can see this is the bottom curve on the graph, and the reason is because Google Doc has much less features as compared to Microsoft Word. So obviously, people looking for advanced features like page layouts and perhaps like a macro, the way to automate some of the work you can do in Microsoft Word, won't find it in Google Doc. But it's a good enough product for many people. And especially it has a feature that was not initially in Microsoft Word, is that it can actually be interactive, edited collaboratively through a connection. So basically, multiple people work at the same time on the document, which I think came later on the side of Microsoft. And what happened is that although it's gathered, it is aimed at a lower market. Basically, the fact that Google Doc is increasing in adoption is because people realize that they don't need all the features of Microsoft Word. It's basically they will come with a very simple product, and Google Doc will actually slowly erode the market of Microsoft Word by obviously having a strategy that is also very convincing. It's free. It's also free because it's offered with the G Suite from Google. And it will slowly erode the market towards actually people who were people who were adopting a Microsoft Word and using it in the first place. They're actually moving to Google Doc. So I think this is a very simple example. We can think of a much simpler product initially gathered to a low-end market, and which increasingly eroding the high-end market that is usually reserved to Microsoft Word. So that's an example. But let's put it this way. For us, if you want to put together a disruptive strategy, what would you do? So the first thing to realize is that major players, the ones that are aimed at the high-end market, they actually incur a set of costs that make their product too expensive for low-end market. So basically, this is why, and this is what Christensen is referred to as the northeast migration of the revenues, basically to continue developing the product and putting new features. The companies, they have to aim at more profitable markets. So basically, they go to the high-end market, which in turn, actually, if you look at the graph, it will create a vacuum on the low-end market. And the vacuum means that there might be an opportunity for a simple product with fewer features and less performant product for a lower market, in case there's obviously an interest for such a set of features in the lower market. And this is where actually a startup company can play a role by proposing this product that is not as good as the one using the higher market, but with good enough for the low-end market, and you can find a price point that will be attractive for that low-end market. This is the first step. The second step here, so once you are in the lower market, then basically you can validate all these features. This is a reference also for startup companies, that you can actually use the concept of a minimal viable product to test all the features for that low-end market to make sure that actually there's this vacuum that I referred to before really exists. And I think the best way to do this is to use an MVP to validate the market and basically confirm that there is an interest for that product. Then the next step here will be, this is the middle curve, to actually increase the features and slowly pivoting. And the term of pivot actually is used here, is that you can change your product by adding features, but you can also change your business strategy and the business model slightly, such that you can actually aim at a more profitable mainstream market as opposed to the one you were before. And the goal here is to do this incrementally so that you start eroding the market of the high-end your high-end competitors. So this is exactly what we did with my last startup, the one that was acquired by Snap. The goal here is that we had a product that was initially aimed at the low-end market, and the goal is that we really work hard to refine the product and make it appealing to higher market until we basically disrupted some of the competitors, and especially one which is Arxen, which was the main competitor we have in the market, which basically owned about 90% of the market we were in, and we were basically able to sell our compiler, our product to the customers of Arxen. So in conclusion, if you want to disrupt a market, so there's actually a few steps to do. First step is that think, is there a low-end market that is actually, I would say, ignored by companies which actually act in the high-end market? Is there basically a vacuum that was created by these companies? If you can confirm if such a vacuum exists or not with an MVP, which actually is a very efficient way to test if there's an opportunity in the market. And the goal now will be basically to create a product for that market and to increasingly pivot to go up market, as you can see here with the curve, which is marked the entrance to disruptive trajectory. All right. So the next model I want to go. So this model is really geared towards innovation, and I would say here these are models that I think it's really important to understand when you want to create a product that is I would say close to the customer, and many of the product that actually people buy, especially, is not necessarily only for B2C, business to consumers, but also for B2B. I think you want to create product that really, a way to say this is will talk to the customer, because actually they give some kind of experience, user experience, and they talk to the emotional aspect of what a customer is looking inside the usage of a product. And there's a quote that I put here on top of it, which actually is due to the same fellow that I mentioned the model before on disruption theory, Clayton Christensen, the professor at Harvard. And this one is because actually he also has some contribution in this area, in addition to Tim Brown, which is understanding the narrative of the customer's life in such rich details that you were able to design a solution that far exceeds anything the customer themselves could have found words to request. So basically what this quote says is that you should really try to understand what the customer wants beyond what he himself can explain. So there's two models here that I'm talking about, but I put them together because they pretty much are the same. One is called as design thinking, and the other one job theory. And my explanation what these things that coexist in the same world is that one is basically the West Coast representation of product creation, which is actually design thinking. It's the firm named IDEO, which has been working with Apple, been working with many customers on the West Coast and designing product technology products. And the job theory, which is the one from Christensen, is the East Coast version. So think of Harvard, the startups in Boston, for instance, and all the things. So it's different type. It's a different school of thought, but actually, if you think of it, it's really, really similar. And I hope I'm not going to make any enemies saying that, because, but I think I'm quite sure that this is something that is very similar. And you can apply this way. Basically, I think the crux here is to try to get insights from the customer. And by insights is really what the customer wants. And this is applicable to business to consumer, business to businesses. So basically, it's come in a set of phases. And the goal here, I'm not going to go into details in the methodology, but the goal here is really to observe what the customer wants and beyond, basically trying to make assumptions on solely technical matters, but also on social matters and emotional matters. So there's really these three aspects when you design a product, is that basically what Tim Brown is saying in his book is that you should really go out and observe people do things in their own environments. And do not try to think of any product, but just think of first of observe what people do. And I think this phase of observation is really important in design thinking, because it helps you to understand a product in context and how people basically are trying to do things and trying to basically find a product that will help them. And this is here I'm quoting Christensen, to make progress. There's this notion of progress. So think of when people want to use a product, they expect to make a progress. It could be in the way they do things, efficiency, the way it will help them find some new work methods and so on. But this is really an important notion, I think, that is present both in design thinking and job theory. Okay, so let's just talk about the observation methods. I mentioned before that one good way actually to do this is to go out and observe what people do. But today we have connected products, and so in the connected world, I think the best thing is basically to use the internet to try to get feedback from your customers through basically the connection that is established between could be your server backend or the customer. And there's many ways to do this. I mentioned a few here. I'm not going to go into any details, but A/B testing is a way basically to test a new feature with only a small cohort of your customers and measure what's different results as opposed to a test set. For instance, the people who do not have the feature, how they behave against the people who have the new feature. And so on. Also, one method here is the storytelling. Is basically a way to create a narrative about what a customer would go around some of the struggles, for instance, during a day work, and how your product actually can helping make progress and have fewer struggles. One of the important aspects also of when you look at designing a product, and this is also both into design thinking and job theory, is that you're trying to balance the product against kind of three, I would say, categories of assumption you make about your product. The first one, desirability, is attached to the market. Is really what does make your product desirable? What does make your product desirable towards the market? Viability is geared towards the business model. How can you make money with that idea? And feasibility is the technical aspect of it. How can you realize or implement that product or that service? And basically, there's many ways to actually overdo one of the categories. You can make a product very desirable, but obviously it's not possible to implement it because it's not feasible, or it might not be viable. So what's is referred to as the innovation sweet spot is when you can really balance these three categories, within your product. So you can really balance the desirability aspect, viability aspect, and feasibility aspect. And this intersection here, you can see in the Venn diagram, is referred to as the innovation sweet spot. Here's the third and the last model for today. And this one is about marketing strategy. And so this one is also, I think when you look at the book, this book is Crossing the Chasm. I also put the Lean Startup because I think it's something that people should be aware of. I mentioned the MVP, the minimal viable product, in the second model. And I think this is also something that people going about creating a business should be aware of, that methodology. But Crossing the Chasm here is also something that's been around for some time, but I think it's really worth also to be aware of, although you will see the example in the book might actually sound antiquated as well, because they're from the late 90s to early 2000. Although I think the book is perfectly valid in terms of the content. So what does that book bring us? So it's basically a model about your market, and think of that as you have a profile for each type of customers that you will meet at different stages of the technology adoption curve. This is the curve that you see on that thing here, is that on that graph. And what it says here is that according to the novelty of a product, there are different stages that this product will go through a cycle of adoption before it becomes basically mainstream. And so think of it here, this is not your company. It's not because you're a startup company, this is very important, that you automatically start at the beginning of the curve. It's because it's basically your product. If your product is not something that people are accustomed to, not something that people are aware of in terms of technology, then you will begin at the beginning of the curve. If now you go with a product that exists already, and this is people actually are already aware of and they use, you actually will start somewhere in the curve. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, it's a different strategy, which is very important because by understanding first, so first step is where does your product fit in that curve, that will give you a path, that will give you kind of a blueprint to see what should be your marketing strategy. In other words, who should you talk to in the market? Should you talk to people or the CTO of a company, the CEO of a company, or should you talk to geeks? This is really to characterize the thing is that if you really want a set of product that is completely new, then perhaps the best people to talk to are geeks or I consider myself a geek, so very fond of technology. But people are more pragmatic, I would say a CIO of the company, a CEO of a company, people who make decisions, for companies of of thousands of people, they might have different priorities, and they will look for different features in the product. So basically what this model gives you, it's a buyer profile and a sales strategy. And basically what you see as referred to a chasm, this is this is actually in the title, the chasm. So you can see the chasm in the curve. So you have it between the innovators, early adopters, and early majority. So the chasm here is something that's I would say it's something that more with the study they came to a conclusion by looking at companies, startup companies that were failing, and companies with a new product that were failing to bring a product between the innovator stage to the early majority. So let's see what that means. The point here is that if you look at this model, we have this chasm in the middle. And what this means is that we need to find a way to go through that chasm, because what does that mean is that if we can go through the chasm, that means we can actually go bring the product from something that will only excite innovators and geeks to something that actually can be purchased like a regular product on the market, which basically will likely make you rich, because some of the features of the geek is that they might put some money towards the product, but there's not many of them, and obviously it might not be able to for a company to earn revenue. So in order to go to a more profitable market where there's a larger set of buyers, you actually need to pass the chasm. So actually one strategy for this, and this is the picture in the chart, is that it's called the Pinball Strategy. Is that the way to go I would say mainstream, is that you need to find a niche for your product to become the go-to product for all the the adopters in this niche market. The strategy is to find this niche market when you can put your startup in, the product of your startup, and then from this niche you'll be able to first of all dominate that niche, become the single product that everybody buys for that niche market, and this is where the so-called pinball strategy works, because you can think of like a pinball game, and when you be able to tilt a pin, then you actually all the pins will fall down, and this is basically a metaphor for going from one niche market to the next one. And why is it actually attractive to do this? Is because these niche markets that you can see as laid out as a set of pins is that they have things in common. And the thing in common is that your track record of sales and your track record of product in one niche will be partly and hopefully a lot reusable in that niche market. And why this is important? Because when you talk to a buyer in one of the niche markets, the well-known chicken and egg problem will show up very quickly, which means that when you go to market and you try to sell your product, people will ask you, who did you sell to before? And when you start, you say, well, you're the first one, right? So very few people actually are I would say motivated or perhaps like even inclined to be the first buyer. So this chicken and egg problem can be mitigated by applying this pinball strategy, because I suppose you can solve it for the first niche, then the second niche will be easier, and the third niche will be even easier. So that's basically the reason for having that. All right, so now what if your product is not that new, and actually you're not starting at the beginning of the curve, but you're actually starting sometime inside the curve, and this is where basically disruption appears. So one basically aspect of disruption is that you don't actually have to be a novel product for disrupting things at all. Because remember what I said with the example of Microsoft Word and Google. There's nothing new about Google Doc, right? Basically, Google Doc brings the same functions, but simpler and cheaper. It's free, and obviously with less performance, but they're attractive to a low-end market. So in that case, Moore in the book Crossing the Chasm refers to these people as the chimpanzee. And what are the chimpanzee doing? Is that a chimpanzee, they're a part of a set of I would say actors in the market, and they're the followers. The first one is the chimpanzee, which I will explain what they are, and one is the gorilla. So the gorilla is basically, think of the gorilla as the big company, right? Microsoft, Google, and in our case, where in my previous company, Strong Commodity was actually Oxan, which was the player that has like 90%, 80% of the market and so on. So the chimpanzees, they try to imitate the gorilla, but they're smart, okay? So the chimpanzee is smart, and this is, according to Moore. So what they do, the chimpanzee, they imitate the gorilla, but with new R&D. So basically, they come up with some new ideas, they come up with some new things, and they might at some point, if they're smart enough with applying disruption theory, they might actually be able to pivot and erode the market of the gorilla. So you can be a chimpanzee. This is one of the profiles, but Moore adds like a third profile, the monkeys. So what are the monkeys? The monkeys, they just imitate, but they don't bring anything new. So think of the monkeys as the one basically that do not optimize with inventing new things, but they just optimize in terms of operations. So think people who copy product and try to do a cheaper product, but the only variable that counts here is the cost. They try to manufacture or to create a product as cheaply as possible. So these are like the knockoffs, basically the copies of the product, things that are trying to think. So I think it might be complicated, so I'll just recall the three profiles. The gorilla, which is the main company. The monkeys, who just try to copy, but do not bring anything new, and only optimize in terms of operation. You can think, so all the copies you can find perhaps made in Taiwan, China, and copies and basically countries where optimizing in terms of operation is easier. And the chimpanzees, which this one actually bring new R&Ds. So these chimpanzees actually are the probable disruptors in the model of Christensen. But basically they appear as the chimpanzees in the model of Moore. So you can choose which one you can be. If you want just to copy the product and basically make a profit by optimizing operations, then you will be a monkey. But if you bring new things and if you actually do some R&D and actually try to compete with new features or different business model, then you will be a chimpanzee. But in any case, you will be competing against the gorilla. So the gorilla, this is the last one here, defend your turf like a gorilla. So there's actually a few threats of strategy that a gorilla can apply. But obviously, the gorilla will try to sell as much as possible because he owns the market. But there's 3 key variables that you should think will basically try to compete in the market is the product leadership, which is one basically that can bring in terms of if you're a chimpanzee or a gorilla, you can actually bring that thing, or operational excellence, which is not something that chimpanzee will try to aim for, but likely more the monkeys, because the monkeys are trying to save on cost, basically to sell at the kind of equivalent product at lesser cost, and customer intimacy. Customer intimacy is perhaps, I would say, this is the Achilles heel of the gorilla, because the gorilla is a large company, and think of it as that it will be more difficult for them to talk to the customers, sit down with customers, spend time developing pilots and all things, because they do things at scale. So they basically need to sell in mass. So it will be more difficult for them to do that. So customer intimacy is something that's very important for startup companies, because if you can achieve it, actually give you an edge against competing against a gorilla. So that's it. Just to conclude this presentation, I went over 3 models. I hope it was not too much information. We actually have classes at St. Elias where actually I teach this. I teach this in university. You can see the InnoKick Master, which is a Master in Innovation here in Switzerland. Also, we have a 5-day classes for professionals, and this is the class that we actually go over all these models in details and see how to apply it to your own product. And this is the second class I give here, the class to actually create an MVP, which is the class that I teach in Japan at Keio University. And we also have a 5-day class here for a half-day class that we teach here for people who want to understand how to create efficiently an MVP. And last but not least, this is a new class we have that I give this class at EPFL. I think the next one is in 2 weeks from now. And this is more into applying DevOps, which is a methodology to create products, today's product, connected products that a lot of startups actually, I think, are applying today. So that's it.